Hello YouTube, my name is Zach, and today we are taking it back to where it all started. We are going to do an actual live analysis of James Labrie, singer of Dream Theater. Now, I haven't done this before. I made a video on James Labrie, but I haven't actually done an analysis, and I'm going to give full disclosure here. This is my second take at this. I just made an hour-long video about this, and I messed the audio up, and the recording came out terrible, so I'm doing this over again. But I'm so glad that I get to, because by doing that, I'm getting to collect my thoughts, because I'm telling you right now that, as a matter of fact, you can still see that the videos are late. I need to put them back to the beginning. There we go, all better. So I made this video before, and it was like an hour long, and I discovered that this is hard. Like, this is easily the most difficult video and analysis I've ever done. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you why up front, so that if everything seems a little disorganized and unclear, it's difficult because James is absolutely the most unusual singer I think I've ever analyzed. His technique and his methods and his timbre, just the sound of his voice, are so distinctive and so unique that concepts that I use on a daily basis with singers all over the place just don't seem to apply to what he's doing. So in all honesty, I can't really give you a bel canto approach to the way that he would sing in a more sustainable way. The things that I'm going to be talking about are much more, for a lack of better word, unclear. They're going to seem a lot less definitive, and I hope you guys can bear with me on that, because it's tough. So what my goal is here is I wanted to compare James in 2017 and James in 1992, 1993. So maybe we can kind of see what changes he's made to his voice, considering how long he's been singing and the food poisoning incident and all that kind of thing. If you haven't seen my Curious Case of James Labrie video, I would recommend you watch it just so you can kind of see what sort of things I specifically mentioned I think led to some vocal decline that he's had. The video is really long, and I wish I edited it better back then, but I didn't know a whole lot about making videos, and that's why I didn't do a live analysis of him then. But now I'm in a position where I can, and since I hit 500 subscribers, I figured, like, why not? You know, you guys have been so good to me. I know that a lot of you asked me about James specifically and wanting to get my perspective on his singing, so this is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to just give little clips of the audio on the left and on the right. The left side is James in 1993, and the right is James in 2017. The left is from when they were playing in Japan on the Live in Tokyo DVD, and in the right, it's their Images and Words and Beyond tour that they did, where they went through the whole album. On the right, the song is Pull Me Under, by the way. The song is tuned down. And so we're going to kind of go from that perspective. It's totally okay that it's tuned down. I mean, singers do that all the time when they get older and they still want to be able to sing something consistently. So it's totally okay. There's no problem with him tuning it down. So we're going to kind of compare the young James to the old James, and just brace yourself, because there's a lot of cases in this where I just don't have a lot of astute commentary, because it's just so weird and so unique. I'll absolutely do my best to try and make things clear, but there are so many things that he's doing that just defy essentially nearly every singing principle that I've ever learned. So it's tough. It's going to be very tough. So forgive me if this is disorganized or a little bit like all over the place. At any rate, for those of you who've never seen my videos before, this is an objective vocal analysis. My purpose here is not to say that I like how he sounds or he's a good singer or a bad singer. My purpose here is specifically to analyze his techniques from a pedagogical perspective. How sustainable were the things that he did? How sustainable are the things that he does now? How healthy of a singer is he? That kind of thing. So that's my approach. So please don't take this as me hating on James or fanboying James. It's neither. I'm a fan of Dream Theater. I have been for many years. I'm not letting the fact that I'm a fan get in the way of me giving an objective analysis of James's singing. So without further ado, left side, we're going to start with it.
Lost in the sky.
Okay, so now as you listen to on the left side, one thing to quickly point out is James is singing with a lot of rasp on his voice at this age, at this time. And the first time I made this video, I really couldn't figure out what it was that made his voice sound so clear throughout the rasp. But I think I've determined that what he's doing is he's just using really solid fundamental techniques, but he's putting rasp on top of it. Now, that does not mean that the rasp is any healthier. You all who follow my channel to any extent know that I don't believe that rasp and harsh vocals are healthy at all. I think it's important to point out that in the studio recording of the song, he uses almost no rasp at all. So I'm thinking that he may have had this sort of divergence from his non-rasp to this raspy sound. Maybe he wanted to be like more of a metal singer as he developed and as he went on. So he added it into his voice, because the Images and Words album has some, but nowhere near as much as like Awake did. Awake was full of rasp. So I think that at this point when this was made, James was having a bit of a transition as a singer. But underneath it, you can still hear some fundamentally good technical habits. He has good breath support. He uses a lot of vowel modification. So on the sky vowel, if you say the word sky, he actually brightens ska, he brightened the vowel a little bit on sky. And what that does is effectively makes the higher pitch easier to hit. When you brighten the vowels, higher notes are easier to sing. So he did some pretty solid technical things. Vowel modifications are good. His embouchures are very good. He doesn't like spread way out wide or anything like that. There's not a lot of tension here. The rasp is the biggest thing that I would say is probably his weakest point as a singer, or at least the most damaging element. I shouldn't say weakest, the most damaging thing that he's doing. Outside of that, his technique seems pretty solid. So let's compare this to James on the right in 2017. So one of the biggest things that you can determine about James on the right is that he's abandoned the rasp almost entirely. He still has a little bit of an edge on his sound, but that actually comes from his resonance placement. His resonance placement is all up in his nose and in the front of his mouth. It's very like way up here. Like, I mean, I can't sound like James because his voice is so distinctive. I mean, there's no way. But I do know that the sound he's creating is a byproduct of stuffing the sound way up in his nose, way up in the front of his mouth. Now, frontal resonance is completely okay. I've talked about this in past videos. The whole chiaro-scuro, combining the light and the dark sound, is totally fine. I think that he's got a little bit too much frontal, and he's putting it so much into his nose that, as I've talked about in other videos, when your larynx is really high, sometimes you stuff it into your nose just to make the high pitches easier to hit. And even though this song is lowered down a half or a whole step or whatever it is, he's still singing in a relatively high tessitura, and I think that that's one of the downsides of writing music when you're a youthful singer. As your larynx hardens, it's just more difficult to sing high pitches no matter what you do. So he's still having to take that same approach to have the similar affect of the song as the way that he used to sing it. So with it being in a high tessitura, even with the lowered key, he's still having to push things up into his nose, make it very frontal to make it easier for him to sing. The downside is the larynx raises up, it closes the vocal tract, then he has to push more to create the sound. Now, as far as his timbre is concerned, it's so distinctive and so unique that I don't really know what he's doing to create that sound. And when I made the video that I just deleted, that's a lot of work. By the time it was over with, I still wasn't exactly sure what he's doing to create the sound. So I'm just going to tell you up front now, I don't know what he's physically doing to make the sound that he does. I've speculated on a couple of things, but I don't think that any of them really do justice a good explanation of what makes it sound what it is. He just has a very distinctive timbre, and I'll try to explain that a little bit more in a bit. Fundamentally speaking, he's got good posture. I think that the same fundamental habits that he had back when he was younger are still there. Good posture, breath support's good. It seems completely fine to me. So I don't think that the basic fundamentals of his singing have ever been bad. His posture and his breathing have always been good. He moves around a lot. That's what frontmen do. But when it comes to him singing, he stays in a good alignment. So that's definitely not a criticism. So let's go back to the left.
This world is spinning around me, and every day since future to past, every breath leaves me one less to my leg.
So one of the biggest things that I see here is that when he sings he puts this huge hard glottal. He puts this massive glottal onset, hard glottal, onto the beginning of the phrase. And if you're doing that all the time, every night, and that's the way that you approach vowels with rasp on your voice too, that will empirically, conclusively cause vocal damage. And I know that we've talked about the whole food poisoning incident in my other video, so I'm not going to go into that a whole lot. We definitely know that that was something that caused a vocal decline for him and an injury that he had to fix and work on. But at the core of it, he definitely did some things that were destructive to his voice in the long term. Like that glottal stuff is really bad for you. He does a lot of vowel modification though to make the phrases better. His embouchures stay very nice and small. They don't go wide, and that's really good. So all those things are good. I think that insistence upon making that edgy sound is causing his voice to have to do too much work. He's pushing way too hard. And actually toward the end of this video, he's going to make some pitches and make some phrases up in the higher end of his voice that are really even and consistent. And I don't really know why he found it necessary to go to that really raspy sound when he can just sing cleanly and it's just as powerful and dynamic as it is when he uses the rasp. I think the rasp gets in his way. Most of his pitch acuity issues come from when he uses the rasp. When he's not using the rasp, his pitch acuity is perfectly fine. So in this case, I think the biggest thing to point out here is his onsets were really bad. And by bad, I don't mean like subjectively sounds bad. I mean bad as in like will destroy your voice if you keep doing them. And if he was touring all year, all over the place, doing onsets like that all night, oh my gosh, I would not be surprised if he had a myriad of vocal injuries. So let's continue with James, the new James on the right. So if you listen to every there, the first time he did a clean onset, and the second time he did like wevery, which is, it's kind of like going ooh every, like ooh every. But that onset was clean too. So even though he kind of did this diphthong, like combined two vowels didn't need to be combined, his onsets are way cleaner now, which is strange because his tone is so like laser, like it's almost like a laser beam. It doesn't sound as resonant or as pretty, I guess, as his old tone did, but it doesn't have the rasp on it. His onsets are cleaner and he's just as well supported. In some ways, his technique now is better than it was then, or more sustainable anyway. So and I think that one of the conclusions that I came to when I tried the first run of this video is that I think James had a voice teacher that confused the heck out of him. I know for a fact that he sought out vocal training, and I know that Mike Portnoy and John Petrucci like told him basically to shape up at some point. I don't remember what era it was. So he's definitely had some voice training, and I honestly think that he went to a teacher that didn't know what to do with his voice. And in all fairness, if James Labrie came to me, I probably wouldn't know what to do with his voice either, because it's so distinctive. The timbre's so unique. There's a term called Fach, and it's a German term. It's for opera, where we kind of classify the type of voice that a singer is. I have no clue what Fach James would be in. I would probably call him like a spinto tenor, which is like a pushed sounding tenor. But even then, like, he doesn't sound like your typical spinto. He's just so unique that I don't blame any voice teacher for not really knowing how to deal with his singing. Now, granted, I'm not the greatest voice teacher in the world. I mean, there are people that are far better than I am at this, far better at analyzing things like this than I am. But from the expertise that I do have, whatever amount that may be, I would have no clue as to how to approach his voice type and how to figure out what he's doing and how you can make it more efficient. It's just so distinctive. So yeah, James is an interesting case. I labeled my last video The Curious Case of James Labrie, obviously a movie reference, but man, he is one curious case when it comes to a singing technique and singing methods. He is one of a kind.
Spell falling gives no meaning to it all, but not today, not tomorrow, then some other day.
So one thing to point out here is that when he sings those high notes, they seem to soar. They have this like ringy clarity sound to them, but he takes the rasp off. And then when he puts the rasp back on, the sound, the fullness of his vowels, the fullness of his resonance kind of like fades. And I honestly think that that's indicative of the rasp causing detriment to his voice. When he lets go of the rasp and he just sings, it's perfectly clear and it's perfectly clean. So I really think that rasp holds him back. Even though it might make him sound like an edgy metal singer, I think technically it's limiting him and it's limiting his range and the efficiency of the pitches that he can create at various points in his range. That was a perfect example. Listen to how clear, like ringy bell like those high notes are, and then when he drops out of it back into the rasp, it just sounds almost like speaking. And not speaking on pitch, like I've said, is healthy. It almost sounds like he's just talking in a general range of pitches. And now the James on the right is going to do that too in a different way later. But I honestly think that rasp creates a more rhythmic affect to his singing and less of a tonal affect of his singing, which maybe that's the point. You know, I know that death metal vocalists don't scream to be melodic. They do it to, or they don't growl to be melodic. They do it to be rhythmic. So maybe he wanted that. Maybe he knew that his enunciation isn't that great because of the range. So he was just trying to give something to give it some more like rhythmic gusto. I don't know, but either way, when he let go of the rasp and he sung in a high tessitura with clean resonance, it was beautiful, and it was even, and it was lined up really well. It was resonant. It was full. It was on pitch. Everything was great. The technique sounded fine. It was like this nice, heady, high, heady, powerful mix. You don't find a lot of people that can move into that mix voice that had that kind of power on it. It just doesn't happen very much. So that was good. I think the rasp holds him back. Now let's see the James on the right and how he approaches this part, and I have a lot to say about this. Okay, so there's no way that anyone in their right minds could say that on the right was as consistent as on the left, okay? Now, here's the thing. The downward spiral of James Labrie video that I made a comment on that kind of started this whole channel, I understand the point that it's trying to make. It uses this specific section of the song as a way to show the way that James has declined vocally over the years. It's not fair, though. And here's why it's not fair. This is easily the most difficult part of this song. The speed of the words being sung, the tessitura, the notes are just sitting way up high and they just sit there the whole time. There's not a lot of deviation. You have to just keep it up in that high range for 30 seconds or so with no break. It's like machine gun speed. And when you have to sit in that tessitura that's already really high for you for that long, your voice gets really tired. This is the part of the song that probably requires the most vocal consistency of everything in the entire song. The issue is that singers are rarely at 100%. Most of the time, we're somewhere between the 70 and 80% range, maybe 85%. On a good day, we're at 90 to 95. And considering that singers tour like this, like him, he tours all the time, he's not going to have very many 90 to 95% days. And to sing that line efficiently with the difficulty of it, you've got to be probably at 90 to 95%. You got to be in great form to be able to sing that consistently. So it's not that James, because of that, should be absolved of any criticism of his technique, but I do think that it's the wrong phrase to use as a point of comparison, because if you're at 80% one day, you're probably going to sound about average. Okay. If you're at 70%, it's going to sound worse, but if you're at 90%, it's going to sound a lot better. And since it's the most difficult part of the song, it shouldn't be the rubric by which his singing is measured. You want to look at what he does in between the super difficult parts to determine where his voice is really at. So if you take the first verse of the song where everything's kind of in the middle of his voice, that's a better place to look at as far as the way that he's approaching his singing technique. These difficult parts are going to be inconsistent. I guarantee you that on both of these tours, every night he did that line a little bit differently, a little better, a little worse every night. And it was wildly inconsistent just because it's the hardest thing that you do. You put someone in a high pressure situation and you're very rarely going to get consistent results because those situations are the outlier, right? So if you're in an outlier type singing scenario, you cannot expect, 80 plus, 85 plus % efficiency all the time. So in his defense, it's very hard for someone to use this portion as a point of comparison for all of his singing throughout the course of his career. You can't do it. However, I think that his problems in this section are that he's just pushing sound out. He's not trying to make enunciation. He's not trying to use any kind of head voice, nothing. He's just laser beam, just creating sound however he can create it. Whatever comes out, comes out. And again, I think that this goes back to the idea that he probably had a voice teacher that just completely confused him. The sound that he creates is so shouty and so frontal and so nasal that it's like he's just abandoned the vocal tract entirely. He's not even thinking about it. And I know that any voice teacher worth their salt are not going to tell you just to make noise, just shout, 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 shout. They're not going to do that. I do not fault James for being inconsistent. I don't believe that any singer that sings in that method does so after they've had training without the trainer teaching them to do things that way. I really think that whoever has been his voice teacher has messed his voice up. And I think that after his injury, he should have gone to specialists that knew pedagogy. Nobody with any sort of knowledge in pedagogy is going to teach someone to sing like that. I say that because the larynx is clearly high, which is why the sound is very thin. It doesn't have a lot of space. It's not very open sounding. His larynx is very high, but the vowels are open enough to make me think that he's got a raised soft palate. So if the soft palate's raised, but the larynx is high, then that means that he's setting up a position in his mouth, and then he's stuffing his larynx way up in his neck. That doesn't do anything. That just puts more pressure on the folds. You might think that it would create some space and expand the vocal tract. It really doesn't. When you talk about position, you're generally referring to more of a Germanic approach to singing, like the Germanic school. And I've learned from both the Germanic school and from the bel canto school. And in the Germanic ideology, you kind of set the position up and you let the sound sing from the position. In the bel canto school, you kind of create the sound, coordinate the sound, and refine from there. And it's two very different ideologies. And I actually think that James's old singing approach, minus the rasp, was much more in the bel canto school. And in the new, it's more Germanic. Like whoever taught him just taught him to set some position up and sing from it, which is why his sound just has this like it sounds like it's always coming from the same place. It's always very frontal, always very nasal. And I know I've discussed this specific section quite a bit, but there's a lot to say about this. It's very, very complicated, but I think that James has been taught to sing after his injury in a method that does not do his voice very good service. I think that he should be working on freedom of sound and not just setting up this single singing position that kind of creates this like laser beam, super consistent, but on the nose, like very like edgy and very like piercing. He should have been taught to re-coordinate, and I do not think that that's the approach that he's taking now. And I don't think that it's his fault. I think that he's been taught to sing the way that he does. Now, his pitch issues could come from a lot of different things. It could come from fatigue, but this is the beginning of the show, so I don't necessarily think that it's fatigue. It could come from him not being able to create the notes because the position that he set up, the notes might not come out. It's not his breath support, but I honestly think that the modern James has been very vocally confused. I know that Mike Portnoy demanded him sing in certain styles in like the mid 2000s, late 2000s. They made him get voice teachers. I mean, he's just had all sorts of people barking at him from all sorts of directions about what he should do. And then he's had injuries. And I mean, he's had his fans criticizing him all the time. I mean, I get it. I would be confused if I were him too. This is why it's important to have a good teacher, a teacher that bases their entire study on pedagogy. And if he did get a teacher that has a basis in pedagogy, they would not have him sing like this. Like if they heard him sing, they'd tell him like, no, something's got to change. This isn't good. Now, the consistency that he's developed, I think that it probably is going to last him for the rest of his career. But he's already beyond the pale in terms of any sort of like longevity. He's maxed it out. You know, I think that he's riding on the last tank of gas he's got here. And if the sound he's making right now is something that he can do enough to make the band go into retirement, then that's fine. Do it, man. But it's just like I would never advocate a developing, budding singer who's learning to sing using the techniques that James is doing here. Long tangent, I know. Let's get back to the video. So I'm going to go back to this video in a second, but listen to that rasp and how the pitches are wobbly. Like they're not accurate. His pitches are like flat and sharp and flat and sharp. But then when he takes the rasp off and he sings in the clean sound, it's perfect, right? The rasp is holding him back and it's wearing on his voice. It's causing vocal fatigue. All these things were what he was doing in the early 90s, okay? So I don't think it's a coincidence that he's completely abandoned this in his more modern approach to singing. That stuff's not sustainable, okay? Perhaps the food poisoning incident was a catalyst to tell him and everyone else, like, hey, James can't keep singing like he is. He's already got a vocal injury now, so he's got to make changes. Perhaps that was it. All that together with the cortisone injections that he did, all that kind of stuff back in this time, those are all destructive. Those crazy harsh onsets he did, the rasp, all of that, it's destructive. And you can hear it just in this and how wildly inconsistent his pitches are when he does it cleanly and when he doesn't do it cleanly. So let's continue. I also think it's notable there he stopped before he sung My Last. He just stopped the phrase. He probably did that to give himself a little bit of a vocal rest before he did that last note. If you listen to the recording on the studio recording on the album, he doesn't do that. He sings the phrase all the way through and it's clean. When you use the methods that he's using in this, it wears your voice out. It just does. It uses the mechanism in a way that it doesn't do on its own. So you're having to manipulate it into doing something that it wouldn't do if you just let it make the sound that it makes. That requires engagement of muscles in ways that they don't do all the time. I mean, it's like if you've never done yoga before and you try to go and do, like, I think it's called crane, where you're like upside down, you're going to fall on your face, right? Because your body's not used to that. Now, the difference between yoga and this is that yoga is designed to help you become more flexible so that you can, whereas using rasp causes the mechanism to do things that will ultimately destroy it. So do not think that I'm comparing yoga to harsh singing, because they're polar opposites. Just the closest analogy I could come up with. All right, let's go to the right. So he said one last, two, and then my last. He kind of cut off there, but he at least sung the rest of the phrase out. He didn't use any rasp, and I'm going to say it, as contradictory as this may sound, in that particular case, the right, while the tone was very very laser, it was more consistent technically. He was more consistent of a singer there than on the left. On the left, his pitches were in and out a lot. And I think that him being flat in the times that he was flat on the right was just a byproduct of this whatever singing method he's developed or been taught. I don't think that it's because he was less technically consistent. I think he's far more technically consistent on the right. And I think that if he had utilized the singing habits that he has now in terms of his technique back when he was younger, his voice would have lasted a lot longer, barring the injury. And he would have sounded more consistent when he moved in and out from his head voice, the high stuff, to the mid-range stuff. So anyway, let's move on to the left. So there, he did a pretty good job of keeping the line even and consistent. He had a nice sense of legato all the way through it. The Pull Me Under, he had a really nice line of sound. It was even, it was consistent. He had a little bit of rasp on it, but he certainly didn't have as much as when he was singing the verses. And so again, I think that was a lot to do with why it sounded more even and consistent. When he sings those high pitches, it sounds great. It sounds like he's really got a lot of control. His head voice is working really well in tandem with his chest voice. He's got a nice mixed sound. It sounds really technically proficient and really solid. So I would absolutely say that when he abandons the rasp, he's a better technical singer, at least back then anyway. So let's move on to the right. Yeah, so definitely one thing that he's doing nowadays is instead of doing onsets, he's doing an ooh, which kind of creates an onset, but he's found a way to do an ooh vowel with a clean onset. So he's made his onsets much better than they used to be. They're not hard glottal at all, and I'm sure that that was something that was coached. Now, the only thing I would say about that is that to do a hard onset, to do an onset, you don't have to do another vowel in front of it. Like example, the word all. Like you can go all with the glottal thing, or you just go all, all day. And there's no glottal in front of it. You don't have to go all to be able to make a vowel and not have a hard glottal onset on the front of it, or a glottal stroke. You don't have to. So, but anything to get those glottal onsets out is something that I'm totally okay with. Like if he cuts that out, however he does it, even if it sounds a little unrefined, that's going to make his voice more sustainable, and that adds up. Like those little things add up over time and help your vocal health for sure. I thought that his approach to that course was quite good. It was a lot, still that like really like bitey sort of laser sound, but that's just the way he sings now. He's just got this position that he sets up and he just creates sound, and whatever comes out, comes out. His pitches are inconsistent as a result of it, but everything else is consistent. His posture's good. His breath support's good. He's singing on the voice. He doesn't do a lot of the airy, wispy off the voice stuff anymore, and I'm sure that has to do with the fact that that's not very sustainable either. And he's probably at his age now having enough time just keeping his cords closed, much less like adding to it with the wisp, because as your larynx brittles as you age, it becomes harder to keep things from sounding like very like if you ever listen to old people talk, they tend, especially old men, they have this like kind of sound like this a lot. They have a very airy, gravelly kind of sound. It's because the cords aren't fully closing anymore. So that's a thing in and of itself, and that could be why they've set the position up to where it's just like very laser, because at least his cords are closing. I mean, it's too stiff, and I think that his vibrato now is manufactured. I don't think that's definitely not a natural vibrato at all, but at least he's closing, getting cord closure. So let's go back to the left. So, that glottal onset, holy moly. I didn't even realize that on my first video. That was, I just paused it right after it, but I just heard that, so I'm like reacting to it. That was rough. Anyway, you can't sing like that. You'll destroy your voice singing like that. I actually paused it because he said, this world's spinning inside of me, and instead of doing me, he went meh. That's totally fine. If you change your vowel from an E to an E, that makes it go from like a more closed to a more neutral vowel, and that's typically what someone would do right after they go above their passaggio, or they're right below their passaggio. You want to kind of lean your vowels, thin them out as you move up through the passaggio. So I think that he's actually a little bit beyond his passaggio there. I think that vowel modification is probably a good idea. I mean, if he's trying to make the sound more consistent around that range, it doesn't really matter how you modify your vowels as long as people can sort of understand what you're singing. I mean, vowel modification happens all over the place in every genre of music. So if he wants to go from me to meh, that's completely fine. So there's a lot to say about this. When he said cry, he went craw. So he tried to do like this weird vowel modification that didn't work. This is probably, if I had to say like the technically worst, this is the worst section of both the videos combined. And I think he's maybe it's too early in the concert for him to be vocally tired, but I would think that maybe he's just mailing it in, giving himself a vocal break on this phrase, and he's just sort of speak singing. That part where it goes, clouds roll by and I roll with them. No, I'm not James Labrie, I'm just singing a falsetto, but that clouds part, like he just went clouds roll, but you can listen to it. He just glissandos out, just like slippy, slidey series of notes. He doesn't even make distinctive pitches. And that's like a Broadway thing that they do a lot. Like in musical theater, you don't necessarily have to sing all the time. You can just speak in a general vicinity of the pitches and it works out okay. And that's definitely what he's doing there. I would think that he's either doing it to give himself like a vocal rest, because nothing about his technique is fundamentally changed. It's almost like just a lack of effort. Maybe he's just not trying to maintain his technique. I don't know. It's hard to say, but that part definitely is a more speech singing kind of approach. And by speech singing, I need to make the distinction that I'm not referring to correlating your singing to your speech. I'm actually talking about making a speaking sound and generally targeting pitches with it. That's speak singing, very different. So he's kind of just mailed in this phrase. I'm pretty sure of it. He just, figured he'd move on to the next one. Maybe he got off to a bad foot and just wanted to just tough his way through it. Not sure, but it definitely didn't have the same kind of consistency in terms of his approach to singing the lines as he has been up to this point. He doesn't have any rasp or anything on his voice or nothing like that. He definitely wasn't worried about his pitch acuity. Let's just leave it at that. So he cleaned it up there toward the end, and it could just be that first half, that section before the little pre-chorus thing there, bridge or whatever section of the song that would be. Maybe that section before it, he just doesn't have it in his voice as much anymore. Maybe all the melisma, all the motion that he would have to do normally, maybe he just can't hold on to it anymore. Maybe his voice is just beyond that point. And that happens. I mean, as you get older, things change. I can't sing super high in falsetto anymore just because I'm older. I'm 31. When I was 22, I could scream in falsetto. Not scream. You know what I mean? Like I could effortlessly falsetto F sharps by James Labrie from Learning to Live, stuff like that. Like, I can't do that as much. It's harder for me now because your voice changes as you age. So it has to do with the malleability of the larynx, which I've gone into before. So, it could just be that his voice just can't really do that section as well as it used to be able to. And it could be that simple. Yeah, see, that right there, very nice, open, clear resonance. I mean, it just shined. It was like a bell ringing when you hear pitches that are that high and that clean that he did. And his posture was good. He had like this maybe a little too far tilted back thing going on, but it was even, it was consistent, it was clear, well supported. It was like a nice mix of head voice and chest voice, and it wasn't raspy. So, I get the pressure to sound like a metal singer in metal music, like with that edge. I get it. I really do. And I guess back then that's what he was trying to do. Maybe he just wanted to create that sound to fit the music. Maybe he thought it fit the music better. I don't know. But if anything, it should be a pretty clear example here of how much that rasp actually limited and inhibited his ability to sing clearly. I mean, there are little places throughout the song where he's integrated little bits of it into the high pitches and it sounds fine, but there's definitely a clear distinction between the clarity, just the vibrancy of his sound when he's singing the higher pitches without the rasp, and when the rasp is there. It's like the rasp creates this like stiffness in the sound. And I mean, if that's the sound that you like, that's okay. I just know that type of tightness in your sound is not good for your voice. It puts way too much strain on the folds. It puts way too much strain on the larynx, and it closes the vocal tract up too much. So those things together are damaging. And so I don't know. I mean, it's just a sound preference, I suppose, and that's something I'm just going to always have to get past as a voice teacher and someone who, his background is in pedagogy. I'm just going to have to ignore that and accept that people do that. But it's a hard pill to swallow when I hear the sounds he was creating before that. It just sounded so, like, beautiful. I mean, it was a beautiful sound that he created. I don't know. It's sad to me. But, you metal guys out there, you singers, then you do your thing, but it makes me sad. Yeah, so that vibrato was, that really wavy thing is manufactured. I mean, that's literally just moving the pitches up and down with your voice. I mean, that's a manufactured vibrato. Most vibrato in like the bel canto is just very tight and narrow. When you listen to opera, it might sound like very wavy, but it's probably in terms of frequency, it's a lot faster than you realize if you compare it to something like that. That's a very wavy vibrato. I thought that generally speaking, he was trying to open up his vowels a little bit more, but he's got this stiff high larynx position. And I think that's holding him back from being able to sing these lines with a lot of legato. It's like when he sings nowadays, everything is very marcato. It's like bop, 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 ba, 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 ba on his phrases rather than da 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 da. It's more like da 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 da. It's just very like punchy. And I mean, legato takes a lot of coordination to do well. And as a singer, I've always learned that you should always strive to be more legato when you sing, unless something specifically demands that you do otherwise. I think that whatever method he's taken now has made legato singing extremely difficult for him. And as a result, his voice lacks that kind of connected beauty that it may have had before. I mean, we speak in a legato way. So when we hear legato singing, we sort of naturally connect to it, because when we talk, our words kind of blend themselves together and to make sentences and to create ideas. And so when you talk or when you sing like this, everything seems to be disconnected in a way. And that's his singing now. It's just the way that he does things. It just doesn't have that same legato. And I think that that's one of the hallmarks of his current sound too. All right, let's go back to the left. So that scream at the end actually was, like, if you listen to that compared to the high-pitched stuff he did earlier, it was so much more constrained sounding. It was so much tighter. And it's like he just stuffed his larynx up at the top of his throat and just screamed and just turned on that falsetto full blast and just screamed and pushed it out. When you sing in falsetto, your voice is not supposed to be taking that kind of like brunt pressure. Falsetto is actually taking away some of the connectedness of the folds. So when you like stuff a sound through like that, it's very hard for your voice to maintain in any kind of meaningful way. I mean, it sounds cool, it sounds impressive, but from a technical perspective, it's destructive, absolutely, doing that with the falsetto. When you want to merge your chest voice and your head voice to create the mix, you have to be very careful, very fastidious about the way that the two sounds sort of converge and come together. But even if you listen to that whole phrase, when he sings without rasp, it's clear. When he sings with rasp, it's very stilted and stifled. But he did have a much better sense of legato. As far as his breath support, all that kind of thing, it's all spectacular back then. Like, his fundamentals are very good. And you could tell that he had some really good training. And maybe what happened speculatively, maybe after he had his injury, his food poisoning thing, he couldn't use the old techniques that he learned very well, so he sought out someone else that didn't know what they were doing. I don't know. Anyway, let's keep going on the right. So yeah, he tried to do something a little bit legato at the end there, and that was a decent attempt at it. I mean, it sounded, he used a glissando. It sounded like he was just sort of scooping the sound down and trying to connect the line together, and that's fine. Typically, a way to make sure that your folds do close and you get a legato sound is by sliding pitches together. Now, in the classical community, some people are okay with that. Some people think it sounds sloppy, whatever. It's just it's a perspective and a preference thing. But yeah, he did some decent legato there at the end. And it just sounds like, I'm not going to go to the end of the video of either of them because it's just one more phrase and there's not a whole lot that you can do with it. I'm already having to edit these down for copyright reasons so much anyway that it's just not worth it. And there's plenty to glean from what we've done so far. But essentially, I think that James Labrie's singing technique in terms of sustainability now is better than it was back then. But the injuries and the age and the vocal work and abuse that he's taken over the years and all the people telling him to do different things and all the different styles he's tried, they've taken their toll. I think that if James had been given instruction to use the type of consistency now back then, his voice would have lasted a lot longer in its old form. I think that this is just my opinion, but I think that James had very good training. And then when he got into a metal band, like a metal band, the one that edgier sound, he just abandoned a lot of it. Or perhaps he tried to merge the two approaches and the metal stuff ended up doing more damage to his classical technique. I mean, if you really want to get technical about it, go ask your buddy Melissa Cross, right? Even in her little Q&A, she says, don't do harsh vocals if you're trying to sing in a classical setting because it doesn't work. So I mean, for what her opinion's worth, either way, like even the prestigious people in the metal community, the metal vocals, are saying like you can't really do the two at the same time. Like it just doesn't really work. So I think what you're seeing in the left is James trying to merge two styles of singing that don't work very well together. On the right, you're seeing a James Labrie who's trying to salvage what he has left and use healthier habits to make his voice last into the end of their careers as a band. Because I'm sure that James is not leaving Dream Theater. His voice is far too distinctive. It's far too unique. And as a result, they're not going to make him leave the band. I get that question all the time. Are they going to kick James out? No, they're not going to kick James out. They wouldn't be Dream Theater. And I mean, I know the Mike Portnoy thing happened, but let's be honest. You can find a drummer that can create the same rhythms. He might not have the same feel, the same groove, but if you need someone to keep a band together, you can find someone with the technical skill to do that. Voices are also distinctive, and James is so much so that he's sort of defined an element of their sound that's completely distinguishable. Like, you know James Labrie's voice anywhere, for better or for worse. You know, he doesn't fit into a mold. I think, like I said, he's kind of like a spinto tenor, which means he's got like a pushed sound. I think that's kind of what he fits into. It's very unique. I don't know. I don't think he could ever really fit into a truly operatic setting. That true symphonic rockestar thing that he did was not really him singing in a bel canto method. It was him taking his method of singing and kind of trying to tie it into a classical thing, and to mixed results. I would say that I did not like James's approach on that album at all, especially knowing like how those pieces were like designed to be sung and how the approach the composers want to take in, which you can kind of discover that by studying that stuff. The way that James approached like some of his like diction and the way that he pronounced some of the languages, like things like that, I didn't like that very much. I did like hearing some of the actual opera singers sing in a metal setting. That was kind of cool. But yeah, I didn't really like what James did in that very much. That was just my personal preference. If you like it, that's fine. And just, I'm picky, and that's the genre that I study, and hearing that kind of sound in there just didn't sound right to me. I think that James is just a cornucopia of conflicting ideologies that has turned into a beautiful case study in how maybe too many chefs in the kitchen when it comes to vocal influences can be completely destructive. If James is making his own artistic choices, that's totally fine. But we know conclusively that throughout his career, he's had people all over the place trying to tell him what to do with his voice, and trying to tell him the types of sounds to make, that he's got to get certain types of instruction. From the very beginning, when they hired him, Dream Theater was looking for someone with a Jeff Tate-like sound. So they were telling him, like, we want you to sound like this. So James has been kind of like a yes man, and kudos to him, because for all the flack he gets from people hate on him all the time, pick on his singing. He's the brunt of all sorts of like criticism. Even Mike Portnoy's taken stabs at him before. I mean, like, kudos to the guy for just putting up with it and keeping on going and doing the best that he can. What more can you ask from the dude? I mean, he's devoted his life to his band. He's given himself up. He's been through it all as a singer. I know that for sure. And you can just tell by the changes that his voice has undergone. I mean, you can hear how much he's been through as a vocalist, and he's still trucking despite the criticism to deliver a product to his fans. So kudos to him for that. And I will never hate on him for that alone. I think he's done the best that he can given his circumstance. So that's it for today. You guys know that I have a Patreon. If you want to check out my Patreon, I'll put the link in my comments. Thanks for watching. I know this video was really long, probably my longest video yet, but that's what it takes to be able to analyze this stuff side by side. And hopefully this was insightful. James is a tough nut to crack. He's tough to analyze. He's tough to really critique. And the first time through this video, I was really confused, and I didn't think I did a very good job. So I think this time was much better. I was a little more focused. So thank you for watching. I hope to see you all soon. I do give voice lessons. You guys know how to reach me. Leave me a comment. Please like, please subscribe if you haven't. Give me some feedback. Tell me what you guys think about this. If there are any other people who understand the voice, have good vocal pedagogy background, if you want to put something in the comments, maybe adding to what I'm saying or contradicting what I'm saying, anything like that. I know a lot of you fans know a lot about the band, and so please give me your feedback on this, and I'd love to hear insight. And I hope that this was all informative, and I hope that this ultimately cleared up some of the confusion surrounding the curious case of James Labrie. Thank you guys so much for watching. You all take care. Have a good one. Bye.